On what should have been the happiest day of her life, Emily stood frozen as her husband, Daniel, handed her a thick envelope instead of the anniversary gift she was expecting. A smile crept across his face, but there was no warmth in it. The words spilled out of his mouth with chilling indifference. "Emily, I think we've reached the end of the road. After 20 years, I can't do this anymore. I've met someone else. You need to move out by the end of the week." The guests at their anniversary party fell silent, as if the room itself had absorbed the shock of his words. Emily's heart sank. This was the man she had built a life with. This was the man she had supported through thick and thin. The man she had sacrificed so much for. And now, here he was, dismissing her in front of everyone like she was nothing. "I don't want to do this in front of our friends," Daniel continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I've made up my mind." "You should have seen it coming." Emily's eyes locked with his, her body numb, and yet a storm was brewing within her. The woman standing next to Daniel was his mother, Agnes. A faint smile played on her lips, but it wasn't a smile of sympathy. It was the smile of someone who had seen this coming, someone who had been in on the secret for far longer than Emily had realized. As the words left Daniel's mouth, Emily's mind raced. Her eyes flicked toward the door where her best friend, Sarah, was standing, her face a mixture of disbelief and anger. Emily's heart pounded as she tried to process the weight of Daniel's betrayal. But in that moment, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just about a divorce. There was something more sinister behind it all. Her voice, barely a whisper at first, echoed in the silent room. "You think this is over, don't you?" Emily said, her eyes now fixed on Daniel. "You think you can just walk away from 20 years like it was nothing?" "Well, you're wrong." Daniel's face tightened. His eyes flickered toward his mother, then back at Emily. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Emily turned toward the guests. Standing taller than she ever had before, "I'll tell you what," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "This is far from over. I'll fight for everything that belongs to me, and I won't go down without a fight." The room remained deathly quiet. Guests exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. Daniel's expression faltered for a split second, and Emily saw the glimmer of fear that flashed in his eyes. For the first time in their marriage, Emily felt in control, but that control was fleeting. She knew that this was just the beginning, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for the storm that was about to hit. Her stomach churned, but she stood firm. The next morning, the silence between Emily and Daniel was deafening. He had left early for work, and she had spent the hours following his departure pacing the house. The suddenness of his betrayal had left her reeling, but her thoughts were beginning to crystallize. She wasn't about to let him have everything without a fight. She couldn't. She glanced at the clock. It was 9 a.m. The phone rang, and Emily's heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. Sarah. Her best friend's voice crackled with urgency as soon as Emily answered. I've got something you need to hear. It's about Daniel and his mother." Emily's pulse quickened as she listened to Sarah. She learned that late last night, Daniel had been in another heated conversation with Agnes, his mother. The words that came through the phone were chilling. "He's not backing out," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. "He's already contacted a lawyer. He's got a plan. And it's not just about the condo or the money. He's planning to take everything you worked for." Emily felt her chest tighten. She had always suspected there was more going on with Daniel than he had let on, but this confirmed her worst fears. The thought of him scheming with his mother behind her back made her sick. He had already moved on, while Emily was left to pick up the pieces of a life she thought they had built together. "I'm not going down without a fight," Emily muttered, clenching her fists as a sense of resolve washed over her. She spent the next few hours digging through their home office, searching for anything that might give her an edge. She knew Daniel like the back of her hand. He had always been meticulous with paperwork, and if there was one thing she could count on, It was that he never threw anything away, and then she found it, a folder with the title Property Division, pre-divorce. The contents were damning. Legal documents, a list of their shared assets, and something that made her stomach turn, a list of all the property he was planning to claim as his own. Emily's hands shook as she picked up the papers. She had been so trusting, so naive. She had never once imagined that her husband, the man she had loved, would treat her this way, but she wasn't going to let him win. "I've got this," she whispered to herself later that day. Daniel returned home in a rush, as if nothing had changed. He kissed her on the cheek, acting as though the morning's conversation had never happened. His eyes were clouded with guilt, but Emily could see right through him. She knew him better than anyone, and the man standing in front of her was not the person she thought he was. "Emily," he said, his voice laced with fake sweetness, "I was thinking, maybe we should have a fresh start. You know, for the both of us." A clean break. Emily's heart slammed in her chest, but she held her ground. The same woman who had once been soft and gentle was now replaced with someone fiercer, someone with a plan, fresh start. She echoed, her voice cold. "You've got to be kidding me, Daniel." He froze, sensing the shift in her tone. For the first time, he was the one taken off guard. His eyes darted around the room, searching for something to anchor him. "I know it's hard, but this is the best for both of us," he continued, his voice faltering. "No," Emily snapped, cutting him off. "This is best for you, Daniel. Not for me. You're the one who's been planning all of this with your mother, aren't you?" His face blanched. She had caught him off guard, and for a fleeting moment, she saw the panic in his eyes. But it didn't last long. "Emily, don't do this," he said, his voice now defensive. "You're overreacting." But Emily wasn't overreacting. She was finally seeing the truth, and she wasn't going to let him manipulate her any longer. The plan had already been set into motion, and it was time for her to make her move. "I'm not going to be your victim, Daniel," Emily declared, her voice steady. Not anymore. The days following that confrontation were tense. Daniel seemed to be going about his usual routine, acting as if nothing had changed, but Emily could see the cracks forming. He wasn't as composed as he used to be. His eyes had a haunted look now, and his usual charm was a little too forced. Emily spent the next few days doing what she did best, observing. She knew that whatever Daniel was planning, it was all going to unravel sooner or later, and she had to be ready. She wasn't going to wait for the storm to hit. She would make sure she was the one in control. She had already begun laying the groundwork. The first thing she did was consult a lawyer, someone who specialized in property disputes and high-stakes divorces. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes, and she knew that Daniel would have every legal loophole covered. But she also knew that she wasn't alone in this fight. As Emily walked into the law office, the sense of determination was palpable. She wasn't going to just roll over and let Daniel take everything. She was going to fight back. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire, immediately put her at ease. "I've reviewed your case, Emily, and I'm afraid this is going to be a tough battle," Claire said, her expression serious. "But the good news is you've got some solid ground to stand on. The condo your home is a gift from your parents, which gives it a certain legal protection. But Daniel will try to challenge that, mark my words. His mother, especially, will try to make this as difficult as possible." Emily nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. Claire continued, "We'll need to start gathering evidence. I'll need access to your financial records, emails, and anything else that can show his intentions. If he's truly planning to claim the property as his own, we need to get ahead of it." Emily left the office with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about the condo anymore. It was about taking control of her life, about reclaiming her sense of dignity and self-worth. Daniel and his mother had underestimated her, and she wasn't about to let them get away with it. Back at home, the tension between Emily and Daniel was palpable. Every time he walked in, it felt like she could sense the lies that still hung in the air. But what disturbed her the most wasn't his silence, it was his attempts to make everything seem so normal, as if their marriage hadn't just come crashing down. It was that evening when things took a turn. Emily was sitting at the dining table, going over some of the legal papers with Claire, when Daniel walked in, his face a picture of casual indifference. He had been out late, and his usual charm was gone, replaced by an almost frantic energy. He dropped his briefcase on the chair and sat down opposite her. For a moment, he stared at the papers in front of her. "Planning your escape already?" he said dryly, his words laced with mockery. Emily didn't look up. "I'm just making sure I don't get screwed over, Daniel." The words hung in the air for a second, but it wasn't the usual defensiveness she would expect from him. Instead, he sighed, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the situation was finally starting to get to him. "I didn't want it to end this way," he said, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. Emily's gaze met his, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt, maybe, or regret. But she wasn't fooled. She knew better than to fall for his manipulation. He had been planning this for months, after all. "Save it, Daniel," she said coldly. "I'm done hearing excuses. I don't trust you anymore. You've shown me who you really are, and I'm not going to let you walk all over me." "Not this time." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of their past. But Emily didn't back down. She knew the only way she could move forward was to confront the truth head-on, and she wasn't about to let him have the last word. The next morning, Emily was up early, going over her plans. She had already made a list of what she needed to do: meet with the lawyer, gather evidence, and start making arrangements for her future. As she sat at the kitchen table, her phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Double quotes M. "I've got something. You need to see this." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" "I went through Daniel's emails," Sarah said, her voice tight. "I know it's a huge breach of privacy, but there's something here you need to see." Emily's hands trembled as she unlocked her phone. Sarah sent her a screenshot of an email thread between Daniel and his lawyer, a man named Richard Hayes, who had been handling the divorce paperwork. The subject line read, "Dividing assets. Plan B." Emily's eyes scanned the message. The contents made her stomach drop. Emily is a problem. If she's not willing to sign the waiver, we'll need to escalate. The condo is the key, and if we can't get it through her, we'll take it in a different way. The email went on to discuss how they could manipulate the legal system to get the condo in Daniel's name by arguing that it was a shared asset due to certain home improvements Daniel had made. The plans were meticulous and cold, outlining step by step how they could pressure Emily into giving up her claim. Emily was sickened. Daniel had been plotting behind her back, and now it was clear that everything he had said was a lie. She couldn't just let him get away with it. She took a deep breath, her hand steadying as she typed her response to Sarah. "Get everything. Every email, every text. We need this proof, and we're going to use it." The days that followed were filled with a sense of eerie calm. Daniel seemed to believe that he had the upper hand, that everything was under control. But Emily knew the truth. She had everything she needed. The ball was in her court now, and she wasn't about to let it drop. Daniel came home late one evening, his face drawn. It was as if the weight of his own lies had finally caught up to him. But Emily didn't feel sorry for him. "Not anymore. I've been thinking," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we can work something out. Maybe we don't have to go through with all of this." Emily turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "You've made your choice, Daniel. Don't expect me to bail you out." For the first time, Emily saw the fear in his eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. He was losing control. "Please, Emily," he begged. "I never wanted it to end this way." But Emily wasn't listening anymore. She had heard it all before. And now it was her turn to take charge. "You've already made your choice," Emily said firmly, her voice steady. "And now I'm making mine." As the days ticked by, Emily knew that the next few weeks were going to be crucial. With every move she made, Daniel seemed to be a step behind, unaware of how much ground she was gaining. Emily wasn't playing his game of words and manipulation anymore. She was playing for keeps. She had the evidence now. Sarah had helped her gather every single piece of information from Daniel's emails, texts, and financial records, each one more damning than the last. It was like a house of cards, and Emily was going to make sure it came crashing down. The first thing she did was secure her position legally. Claire, the lawyer, had been working tirelessly to build a strong case for her. Emily made sure to keep Daniel's deceit and hidden assets at the forefront of their discussions, focusing on the condo and the finances. She knew that if she could keep the property, she would be financially secure enough to move on without relying on him or anyone else. But Emily wasn't just fighting for material assets. The deeper battle was for her own self-worth. She was no longer the woman who had been manipulated and controlled. She was reclaiming her life. Every legal step she took was a victory in itself. Each meeting with Claire felt like a small win, a reminder that she was not helpless, that she was capable of taking control. It wasn't long before Emily realized that the silence between her and Daniel was deliberate. He was trying to lure her back into his world of false promises. But no matter what he did, no matter how much he pretended to be the loving husband, Emily knew the truth. She had seen the cracks in the facade, and now she was ready to expose them. The phone call came early one morning. Emily was sipping her coffee when the name Richard Hayes flashed across her screen. It was the same lawyer Daniel had been secretly consulting. Emily didn't hesitate. She answered the call, her fingers trembling with a mixture of nerves and determination. "Ms. Roberts, I've been asked by Mr. Price to extend an offer." Richard's voice was smooth and controlled, but there was an underlying tension in his words. "He's willing to settle the divorce without further legal action. We can make this as quick and easy as possible if you agree to sign the waiver for the condo." Emily's heart sank, but she refused to let him see her fear. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I believe Mr. Price is offering you a fair settlement," Richard continued, not even attempting to mask the subtle hint of condescension in his tone. "But if you refuse, we will have no choice but to pursue a court case. And as I'm sure you're aware, that will only drag this out longer. It's in your best interest to settle now." Emily's thoughts raced. She knew what he was doing. He was trying to pressure her, trying to make her feel cornered. But she wasn't going to fall for it. "Not this time." "You know what, Richard," she said, her voice steady. "I don't need to be pressured into anything. You and Daniel can do whatever you want, but I won't be signing anything. Not unless it's a fair deal." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. She could hear the rustling of papers, the quiet murmur of voices in the background. "Very well," Richard replied finally. "But just remember, Mr. Price has the resources to make this as difficult as you want it to be. If you're prepared for that, then we'll see you in court." "I'll see you there," Emily said, her tone unwavering. She hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. She was standing her ground, and Daniel was beginning to realize that he wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. The moment had finally arrived. Emily had spent weeks preparing for this day. She had everything she needed, the legal documents, the evidence, and the resolve to make sure that Daniel couldn't take everything from her without facing the consequences. It was the day of the anniversary party, and the restaurant where it was being held was buzzing with energy. The large ballroom was filled with guests, each one talking excitedly, anticipating the evening's celebrations. Daniel had spared no expense, securing a lavish venue to mark their 20 years together. The grand chandelier glittered above, the soft sound of classical music drifting through the air. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was all just a show of final act before the curtain came down. She had been invited to the event. Of course, though she had no intention of playing the part of the grieving wife. No, she was here to reclaim her dignity and expose the truth. She wasn't going to be the silent victim anymore. As she arrived at the venue, Emily saw Daniel standing at the entrance, greeting guests with that familiar smile. The smile that once charmed her, the smile that had concealed so many lies. But now, as she looked at him, she saw him for what he truly was, a man who had been willing to tear apart everything they had built for his own selfish desires. Emily didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. She simply walked past him, her head held high as she made her way into the ballroom. Guests whispered as she passed, some with pitying looks, others with curiosity. But Emily wasn't here to garner sympathy. She was here to take control of her own narrative. When the time came for Daniel to give his speech, Emily remained seated at the front, her eyes never leaving him. He took the stage, holding the microphone with a practiced ease. Looking out over the crowd with the same charming smile, "I'd like to thank everyone for being here tonight," Daniel began, his voice loud and confident. 20 years is no small feat, and I truly appreciate all the support you've given me and Emily throughout our marriage. Emily listened as he continued, speaking in vague terms about the highs and lows of their relationship, about the journey they had been on together. She fought to keep her composure, but the longer he spoke, the more she realized how much he had taken from her, how much he had stolen, not just from their marriage, but from her own life. But when he mentioned starting over and moving forward, Emily couldn't stay silent anymore. "I think it's time to speak the truth." Emily's voice cut through the room, sharp and clear like a knife. She stood up, making her way to the stage, her every step echoing in the quiet room. Daniel's face turned pale as he saw her approach. He tried to stammer out a word of protest, but it was too late. Emily had taken the microphone from his hand, and now the room was listening to her. "I'm sure you all know by now that my marriage to Daniel has come to an end," she began, her voice steady, though the weight of her words was palpable. "But what you don't know is how much of a lie our life together really was. I've spent 20 years building a life with a man who was never honest with me, a man who thought he could manipulate everything, including our home." She pulled out the legal documents from her purse, documents that would change everything. "Tonight," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger with every word, "I'm here to tell you the truth. Daniel's plans to take our condo were never about our future. They were about control. But what he didn't count on was me finding the truth. I will not be signing away what is rightfully mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could feel every pair of eyes on her, but she wasn't afraid. She was finally free. Daniel stood frozen on the stage, unable to speak. Agnes, standing off to the side, looked like she had just seen a ghost. The guests, who had come to celebrate a false reality, were now confronted with the undeniable truth. The room was thick with tension. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, unable to comprehend what was happening. His carefully laid plans, his secret meetings, his manipulation, his betrayal were unraveling before him in front of their closest friends, colleagues, and family. Emily had just exposed him for the man he truly was, and the shock on his face said it all. Guests exchanged confused glances. Some looked at Emily with pity, others with admiration. A few seemed to realize that the woman they had thought was the victim had been playing a much smarter game than anyone had anticipated. But Emily didn't care what they thought anymore. She had made her statement. The truth had been spoken, and now the dominoes would fall. "Daniel, is this how you wanted it?" Emily's voice rang out, cutting through the silence. "You've been plotting this behind my back for weeks, lying to me, using our friends and family to prop up your facade. And now you're going to stand there and act like I'm the one who's in the wrong." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He glanced over at Agnes, who stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold with an air of disbelief. It was as if she had never truly believed Emily would fight back. But now, as the room turned against them, it was clear that their world was collapsing. One of the guests, a longtime friend of Emily's, spoke up. "Daniel, is this really what you've been planning? All this time, you've been lying to her." Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out of this, but it was too late. The trap had already been set. Emily took a deep breath, her emotions steadying as she continued. "I've spent too many years believing in a man who didn't believe in me. But I'm done with that now. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Daniel. I'm taking back what's mine." The room buzzed with murmurs, and Emily felt a rush of power, of liberation. She wasn't just taking back a condo. She was reclaiming her dignity, her independence, her right to be respected. She wasn't going to let Daniel, or anyone, dictate her future. Turning away from the stunned guests and Daniel's pleading eyes, Emily walked toward the exit. The evening was supposed to be about celebration, but for her, it had become a turning point, a moment of personal victory. Before she left, Emily glanced at Daniel one last time. He was standing there, staring at her with a mix of confusion, regret, and anger. But she didn't care anymore. She had seen enough. She had fought enough. And now it was time to move on. The days that followed were a blur. The fallout from the anniversary party had been nothing short of chaotic. Emily's revelation had sent shockwaves through their social circle. Daniel's reputation, once untouchable, was now in tatters. People who had once admired him began to question his integrity, his character. Even his closest allies were beginning to distance themselves, but Emily didn't let it distract her. She kept her focus on the legal battle ahead. Claire, her lawyer, had already filed the necessary documents to protect her assets. Emily was determined to make sure Daniel couldn't take anything else from her. It wasn't long before she received an unexpected phone call. It was from Sarah, her best friend, but it wasn't just a casual check-in. "You're not going to believe this," Sarah said, her voice laced with excitement. "I've been talking to some people, and it turns out Daniel's been involved in some shady financial dealings, things he's been hiding from you for years. And I've got the proof." Emily's heart raced as she listened. Sarah went on to explain how she had stumbled upon a series of transactions, hidden accounts, and investments that Daniel had been using to funnel money away from their shared assets. Emily's suspicion had been right. There was more to Daniel's betrayal than just the condo. "I'm sending you everything I have," Sarah continued. "This could change everything. You need to act on this quickly." Emily felt a surge of both disbelief and determination. This wasn't just a divorce now. This was a fight to expose the full extent of Daniel's deception. "Thank you, Sarah," Emily replied, her voice firm. "This is exactly what I needed. I'll make sure it gets to the right people." Emily wasn't going to let Daniel walk away unscathed. With Sarah's information in hand, she and Claire worked tirelessly to build a case that would expose Daniel for the financial manipulator he was. The stakes were high now, not just for the condo, but for everything Daniel had hidden over the years. It took weeks of meticulous work, but Emily knew she was getting closer. She could feel the weight of the legal battle pressing down on her, but this time she was ready. On the day of the court hearing, Emily walked into the courthouse with a calm resolve. She was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by betrayal. She was in control now, and she wasn't going to back down. When the hearing began, Daniel's lawyer immediately tried to push for a quick settlement, offering Emily a fraction of what was rightfully hers in exchange for her signature on a waiver. But Emily had already anticipated this. With Claire by her side, Emily presented the evidence of Daniel's hidden assets, the financial transactions that had been kept in the dark. She showed the court how Daniel had been siphoning money from their joint accounts, using their shared wealth to fund his own selfish desires. The room was silent as Emily's case unfolded. The judge, an elderly woman with years of experience, carefully reviewed the documents and evidence presented. She glanced at Daniel, who now seemed smaller, almost defeated. As the reality of his actions set in, "Mr. Price," the judge finally said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room, "it appears that you've been less than transparent in this matter. Your attempts to manipulate the situation will not be taken lightly." Daniel's face flushed with embarrassment, and for the first time, he looked truly humbled. He had underestimated Emily in every way. He had thought he could take everything from her, but he had failed. The judge continued, "I hereby rule in favor of Mrs. Price. She will retain full ownership of the condo, and you will be held responsible for the financial misconduct uncovered in these proceedings." The gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the legal battle. But for Emily, it was more than just a victory in court. It was the final chapter in her journey toward freedom, with the legal proceedings behind her. Emily felt a sense of relief that she hadn't known in years. The burden of Daniel's betrayal, his lies, and his manipulations had been lifted from her shoulders. She was free. She moved into her new apartment, the condo she had fought so hard to keep. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of her resilience, her independence, and her strength. As the days passed, Emily found herself rediscovering parts of herself she had long forgotten. She had always put others first, especially Daniel. But now she was learning to put herself at the top of her priority list. She had a future ahead of her, one that wasn't defined by her past with Daniel. And as for him, Daniel's life had spiraled. He lost his job, his friends, and his reputation. He had thought he could destroy Emily, but it was he who had ended up in ruins. Emily heard about him through mutual acquaintances, how he was barely scraping by, living in a shabby apartment, and constantly looking over his shoulder as the fallout from the divorce continued to haunt him. But Emily didn't care. She had moved on. Her heart no longer ached for the man who had once been her husband. The only thing that mattered now was her own happiness, and as she stood on her balcony, overlooking the city, she smiled. She had fought for her life, for her dignity, and for her future, and she had won. Emily wasn't going to let Daniel walk away unscathed. With Sarah's information in hand, she and Claire worked tirelessly to build a case that would expose Daniel for the financial manipulator he was. The stakes were high now, not just for the condo, but for everything Daniel had hidden over the years. It took weeks of meticulous work, but Emily knew she was getting closer. She could feel the weight of the legal battle pressing down on her, but this time she was ready. On the day of the court hearing, Emily walked into the courthouse with a calm resolve. She was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by betrayal. She was in control now, and she wasn't going to back down. When the hearing began, Daniel's lawyer immediately tried to push for a quick settlement, offering Emily a fraction of what was rightfully hers in exchange for her signature on a waiver. But Emily had already anticipated this. With Claire by her side, Emily presented the evidence of Daniel's hidden assets, the financial transactions that had been kept in the dark. She showed the court how Daniel had been siphoning money from their joint accounts, using their shared wealth to fund his own selfish desires. The room was silent as Emily's case unfolded. The judge, an elderly woman with years of experience, carefully reviewed the documents and evidence presented. She glanced at Daniel, who now seemed smaller, almost defeated. As the reality of his actions set in, "Mr. Price," the judge finally said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room, "it appears that you've been less than transparent in this matter. Your attempts to manipulate the situation will not be taken lightly." Daniel's face flushed with embarrassment, and for the first time, he looked truly humbled. He had underestimated Emily in every way. He had thought he could take everything from her, but he had failed. The judge continued, I hereby rule in favor of Mrs. Price. She will retain full ownership of the condo, and you will be held responsible for the financial misconduct uncovered in these proceedings." The gavel slammed down, signaling the end of the legal battle. But for Emily, it was more than just a victory in court. It was the final chapter in her journey toward freedom, with the legal proceedings behind her. Emily felt a sense of relief that she hadn't known in years. The burden of Daniel's betrayal, his lies, and his manipulations had been lifted from her shoulders. She was free. She moved into her new apartment, the condo she had fought so hard to keep. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of her resilience, her independence, and her strength. As the days passed, Emily found herself rediscovering parts of herself she had long forgotten. She had always put others first, especially Daniel. But now she was learning to put herself at the top of her priority list. She had a future ahead of her, one that wasn't defined by her past with Daniel. And as for him, Daniel's life had spiraled. He lost his job, his friends, and his reputation. He had thought he could destroy Emily, but it was he who had ended up in ruins. Emily heard about him through mutual acquaintances, how he was barely scraping by, living in a shabby apartment, and constantly looking over his shoulder as the fallout from the divorce continued to haunt him. But Emily didn't care. She had moved on. Her heart no longer ached for the man who had once been her husband. The only thing that mattered now was her own happiness, and as she stood on her balcony, overlooking the city, she smiled. She had fought for her life, for her dignity, and for her future, and she had won. Weeks passed after the court ruling, and Emily's life began to settle into a new rhythm. She was no longer weighed down by the shadows of her past with Daniel. The daily routine of work, meetings, and quiet evenings at her new condo became a source of comfort, an unexpected sense of peace after years of turmoil. But it wasn't just the silence of her apartment that was soothing. It was the sense of control she had over her life now. She wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe, truly breathe, without the constant weight of Daniel's expectations or his manipulations hanging over her. Emily had recently started a new project, one that had been a passion of hers for years, but one she'd put aside to support Daniel's career. She had always dreamed of starting her own non-profit organization, something that would allow her to give back, to make a difference in the world. And now, with the financial stability she had regained, she was finally able to take the first steps. Her new non-profit, which focused on supporting women going through divorces or domestic disputes, was slowly taking shape. Emily spent her evenings meeting with lawyers, strategists, and potential partners, building a network that was both personal and professional. She wanted her non-profit to be a place where women could find strength in numbers, a place where they could reclaim their lives, just as she had. It wasn't easy, of course. Running a non-profit came with its own set of challenges, but Emily thrived on them. She had always been a problem solver, a woman who didn't back down from adversity. Her past had shaped her into someone who could now turn any setback into an opportunity. Every call, every email, and every meeting took her one step closer to her goal. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily found herself at the local community centre, preparing for a small fundraising event. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something bigger. She had invited a few local women, some of whom had reached out to her through social media after learning about her journey. They were all in different stages of their own battles, some still fighting, others already on the other side. As Emily set up for the event, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she'd come. The woman she had been just a year ago, broken, unsure, trapped in a marriage that had stifled her, felt like a distant memory. She was no longer the person who let fear dictate her decisions. She had taken control, and she was now walking a path of her own choosing. The event itself was a success, beyond what Emily had expected. The women who attended shared stories of their own struggles, of their personal battles with men who had tried to break them. Some had fled abusive marriages, while others had been left with nothing after a bitter divorce. But despite the pain and hardship, there was a common thread between them all, the strength to rebuild, to move forward, to rise again. Emily shared her story as well, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She spoke of the darkest moments of her marriage to Daniel, the moments when she had thought she would never make it out. But she also spoke of the moments of clarity, when she realized she was more than her past, more than the woman she had been in that marriage. "I'm here tonight not just because I survived," Emily said, her voice calm yet full of conviction, "but because I chose to fight for something better, for me. For all of us." The room went quiet as Emily's words sank in, and then, one by one, the women began to speak. They shared their hopes, their dreams, and most importantly, their resilience. Emily's heart swelled with pride as she realized that this was just the beginning. She had created a space where women could feel seen, heard, and understood. And in turn, they had given her a gift: hope, connection, and a reminder that she wasn't alone. Several months later, Emily found herself standing at the edge of a new chapter. Her nonprofit had taken off, far surpassing her expectations. She had established partnerships with local businesses, legal firms, and mental health professionals, all dedicated to helping women like her reclaim their lives. It was a small but powerful movement, and she was at its heart. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Emily sat on her balcony, sipping a glass of wine as the city lights twinkled below. Her mind wandered back to the anniversary party, the moment when everything had shifted. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything, but now, looking back, Emily could see it for what it really was, the beginning of her transformation. It had been a painful, difficult journey, but it had led her to a place she had never imagined, a place of empowerment, of freedom, and of purpose. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text message from Sarah popped up on the screen. "Sarah, you've been nominated for the Women's Leadership Award. I'm so proud of you." Emily blinked, her heart skipping a beat. The Women's Leadership Award. It was an honor given to women who had made a significant impact in their communities. She had never imagined she would be in the running for something like that. But as she read the message, she realized that it wasn't just about the award. It was a reflection of everything she had built since that moment when Daniel's betrayal had changed her life. The next morning, Emily stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress. The Women's Leadership Gala was that evening, and she had been invited to attend. She couldn't help but smile at the thought. It was surreal to think about how much her life had changed. From the woman who had been blindsided by a man she thought she knew, to the woman who now stood on her own, ready to face the future with nothing but hope and determination. As she made her way to the gala, Emily felt the familiar thrill of possibility. This was her moment to truly celebrate everything she had achieved, everything she had fought for. And as she walked into the room filled with powerful, inspiring women, she realized that she had become the person she had always hoped she could be: strong, independent, and ready to take on the world. That night, as she accepted the award, Emily looked out at the audience, at the women who had supported her, at the ones who had walked similar paths. She knew that this was just one chapter of a much larger story. Her story wasn't defined by what Daniel had done to her. It was defined by how she had fought back, how she had rebuilt her life from the ashes of betrayal. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice steady and clear, "for believing in me, for showing me that we are all capable of so much more than we think. This is just the beginning." The applause was deafening, and as Emily stood there, accepting her award, she realized that her future was not just about surviving, it was about living. Living on her own terms. Living with purpose. Living with the power to create the life she had always dreamed of.